A raft of updates to the W13 allied to the smooth and high-speed Silverstone circuit perfectly suiting its car allowed Lewis Hamilton to fight with Ferrari for the win. Although Hamilton eventually finished third behind race winner Carlos Sainz and the recovering Sergio Perez, the fact that he was able to battle for a podium spot on pure pace marked a big step forward for his Brackley-based squad. However, despite the British Grand Prix form indicating that Mercedes is making good progress with its car, Wolff is adamant that his team will not allow itself to make the same mistake it made after this year's Spanish Grand Prix. After that race, where Hamilton showed similarly strong pace, Mercedes hoped it had turned the corner on its campaign and would be able to target better results. But struggles at subsequent venues since then, including especially tricky times at Monaco and Baku, proved to be a reality check for the team. However, it has recently come to light that the porpoising issues that have dogged Mercedes' season were not consistent with some of the other teams due to the implementation of regulations over the stiffness of the car's floors, which has left Toto Wolff very unhappy. As part of the discussions between the FIA and teams about a planned safety clampdown on excessive porpoising that drivers are unhappy about, one area of focus has been on the stiffness of the floors and planks of the cars. It's believed that during talks in a Technical Advisory Committee (TAC) meeting in the week after the Canadian Grand Prix, suspicions emerged of some teams pushing the boundaries of the rules that are supposed to limit the flexing of their floors and planks. The current regulations stipulate a maximum deflection of 2 mm at the two middle plank holes, and no more than 2 mm at its rearmost hole in a bid to ensure that the floor is stiff enough. However, there were claims some teams have managed to clearly flex the floors by as much as 6 mm in total, which would allow them to run with higher stake and much closer to the ground for increased performance without the risk of suffering the ill effects of ground strikes. Sources suggest a number of teams were surprised at what their competitors had been up to, with Wolff confessing how taken aback he was about the situation. Nobody had an idea until the FIA brought it up in the last Technical Advisory Committee, which was to a great surprise of all the teams, he explained. What's in the regulation and what the intent of the regulations is pretty clear. I mean, there is no argument why that could deflect more than what's in the regs. So, a bit of a surprise to say the least. More a shocker. In response to the revelations over Flexi floor antics, the FIA responded as part of its bid to reduce the effects of porpoising by notifying teams of a planned change to the rules. In the draft technical directive issued at the British Grand Prix by the FIA's single-seater technical director Nicolas Tombazis, and which comes into force in France, the FIA has announced a tightening up of the rules regarding floor stiffness. It made clear that it was making the move to ensure that there was a fair and equitable relevance amongst all the cars, which perhaps suggested that was not the case before. Tombazis made clear that the FIA believed teams having excessive deformation of the floor was being done to achieve significantly lower ride heights and hence an indirect aerodynamic gain. The 2 mm tolerance will be rigorously enforced, and the stiffness around the floor hole must now be uniform for a radial distance of 15 mm outside the periphery, with a variance not exceeding 10% either way. The FIA added, competitors will be required to demonstrate compliance with these provisions by way of a detailed inspection of both the CAD and the physical installation, as well as finite element analysis. The number of teams have welcomed the move by the FIA, as they suggested that the governing body must have acted because it felt some teams were going too far with what they were doing. McLaren team boss Andreas Seidel said there must be a reason why Nicolas has put up some clarifications in what he wants to see and what he expects. From our point of view, we are happy with this clarification, which is in the TD, because in the end it should help us that we're all on a level playing field. While it's unclear which teams were potentially playing around with flexi floors, Mercedes trackside engineer Andrew Chauvelin reckoned that the change could help move his squad nearer the front. When it came to light, we realised there's opportunities that we've perhaps not been taking or exploiting, he said. So it won't affect us in how we run our car, it may well be it affects our competitors, and by virtue of that, we move a little bit closer. And following another podium for Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes, Toto Wolff is speaking about his hopes for the season. Speaking exclusively to motorsport.com, Wolff said that the Silverstone result was far from enough for Mercedes to feel that the team could go on the attack from now on. Asked if he felt the British GP form meant the team could change its mindset for the rest of the season, Wolff said, "No, not yet, because we have had in Barcelona moments where we saw some light at the end of the tunnel. Then the next 3 street circuits proved that we were wrong, so I don't want to talk us up nor be too optimistic at this stage." While Mercedes is showing a definite step forward in speed compared to pace setters Red Bull and Ferrari, Wolff believes that Silverstone exposed the fact his team needs to make progress with improving the ride of its car. Through the high-speed corners at Silverstone, both Hamilton and teammate George Russell encountered ongoing problems with bouncing, although this was not as bad as some other teams. Pushed on whether he felt that Mercedes could at least feel it now has a solid direction with the W13, Wolff said, "We hit direction in Barcelona too. We still have our ride issue that we had over all 3 days, less so in the race, and that's something we need to tackle. With this weekend's F1 venue in Austria having not especially suited Mercedes in the past, Wolff thinks it could be a better barometer of his team's form. There are a few corners which in the past didn't make our car happy, so that's something we need to look at," he said. "But it's a constant learning curve. I think this season is going to be a pretty tough one to win, so we just need to get our ducks in a row to be properly on top of the car's performance." It wasn't all positive for Mercedes at Silverstone, as for the first time this season, George Russell failed to finish within the top 5 of a race. There are mixed feelings at Mercedes after the British Grand Prix. On the one hand, there is joy after Lewis Hamilton's podium finish, but on the other hand, there might have been more to it. With George Russell dropping out of the race, of course, but victory might have also been possible. Andrew Chauvelin, Mercedes trackside engineering director, commented, "Lewis, on the other hand, had a great start moving to 3rd, so it was a shame that he was put back into 5th for the restart from where we dropped a further position. Even so, there were plenty of times where it looked like we might be able to get back into the fight for the win, but sadly, it was not to be." Russell had finished in the top 5 every weekend until the British Grand Prix, but his DNF has now ended that run. Where the majority of the field left on mediums when the lights went out, Mercedes chose to try something different with Russell by sending him off on hard tyres. That didn't work out well. George's race didn't last long. We knew the hard tyre would be a risk, but didn't anticipate us losing so much ground off the line. That clearly was the contributing factor in George being part of the accident at the start, which ended his race, said Chauvelin. But at least no one was hurt. Mercedes leaves Silverstone with 15 World Championship points. It could have been a lot more. On one hand, it's frustrating to only come away with a 3rd place, as with 2 cars and a bit more luck, we could have been fighting for the win and a good haul of points. On the other hand, we can be pleased that we were fighting at the front after a very tough start to our season. Looking ahead to the next race, we return for the Austrian Grand Prix, so it's a familiar schedule for the race weekend at the Red Bull Ring, although there are a few adjustments here and there due to the sprint race format. In 2021, Silverstone, Monza and Interlagos were the 3 circuits where the F1 sprint was tested over the weekend, and this format will be used again in 2022. In Austria, the alternative format will be used for the 2nd time this season after Imola. The first free practice session starts on Friday, which is the only time that the F1 drivers can fine-tune their setup for qualifying. That follows the same day. In this case, qualifying does not determine the starting order of the race on Sunday, but the starting order for the F1 sprint on Saturday. For that sprint race, there is first a 2nd free practice on Saturday. However, due to Parc Fermé, teams can hardly make any adjustments to the car, and this session is therefore rarely used. The sprint starts at 3:30 p.m. The result of the sprint determines the starting order for the Grand Prix on Sunday, which starts at 2 p.m. UK time.